The standard of rugby on show from the two French teams was otherworldly.
This is the Bordeaux and Toulouse duopoly of the age. They are the two great club teams in the world.
Is there any part of it a shame that it is a quarter-final and not a final?
I don't think it would be a massively bold prediction to say that they might win 66 games in a row, which would almost get to a level where it would be one defeat in about 100 matches.
Hello, welcome back to The Ruck, the journalists' rugby podcast from The Times and The Sunday Times. The last 16 of the Champions Cup is done and dusted. We've got the quarter-final lineup to look ahead to this coming weekend, plus the start of the Women's Six Nations. Welcome along. My name is Alfie Reynolds. Alongside me in studio on a bank holiday Monday, look at the work ethic, you love to see it, is Alex Lowe and Elgan Alderman. Morning, lads.
Morning.
Good morning.
How are we?
Really good.
Good.
Yeah.
Alex, you look like you've come in like an old-fashioned All Blacks jersey today.
Well, I have
it.
actually.
For a midweek game against a Pontypool Abertillery combined 15.
I have. It's actually from a company that I got a mate who has started up his own rugby jersey company.
Oh, really?
So I wasn't intending on plugging it, but now you've mentioned it, Alfie. Old Novo, and a lot of the jerseys are based on classic old
Okay,
rugby
nice.
shirts. This is just the All Black.
The All Black one. No, I like it a lot.
Check it out.
You guys were both over the weekend at various last 16 games in the Champions Cup. We'll look ahead, as I mentioned, to the quarter-final lineup, which looks really tasty this coming weekend, the Women's Six Nations, and we're also going to be having a chat with Mark Palmer. He was at the Edinburgh game in Dublin on Sunday, and he's also there in Glasgow for their win over the Bulls on Saturday in absolutely torrential conditions as well. Now, you two actually can get out of this one quite easily, but last week on the pod, because you weren't on, myself, Will and Charlie were kind of saying we're all waiting for the quarterfinals really in the Champions Cup, aren't we? But were we unfair, Alex? Did the last 16 go past certainly our expectations, many people's expectations?
I think so, and I think part of what was so special about this weekend was what it has set up. So that unquestionably what we're waiting for in the quarterfinal weekend is part of the conversation. So the two best teams in France meeting the two best teams in England. Elgan was on a French doubleheader, and your socials, anyone who's been to knockout games in France, the colour, the vibrancy of the colour in Toulouse and Bordeaux, it just reinforces that A, the jeopardy, B, the tribalism that you get in this competition. And I thought in the games that weren't close, so pretty much your Elgan's two games, the standard of rugby on show from the two French teams was otherworldly. It was just as close to perfect rugby as you'd ever want. So you didn't get the humdinger contest, but you've got something really special. I thought Friday night at Northampton, Saints Castra was a riot and just loads of fun. The skill level was incredible. I was at Bath Saracens, which was a fascinating game in its own right. I think really only Quinn Sale was a dud, and Toulon Stormers. We've got to talk about how that one ended. There were so many storylines. There was jeopardy. There was tension. There was tribalism. And it set up a quarter-final weekend that is thrilling. There'll be some sizzling games there. So yeah, I think you were a bit mean on it, but the Champions Cup does have its issues, and the reason we love it is for the weekend we've just had, the weekend that's coming, and that's why we give the organisers grief, because it takes far too long to get there without this sense of tribalism and excitement, because it doesn't matter enough early on, and now when it really matters, you see it, and that's what makes this competition so special.
As Alex mentions, Elgan, to be fair, the games you were at, Toulouse, Bristol and Bordeaux, Leicester, were really, really one-sided affairs, but I look, Northampton 49, Cast 41, Bath 31, Sarries 22, Toulon 28, Stormers 27, Glasgow 25, Bulls 21, Leinster 49, Edinburgh 31. All of those games, I think, a lot closer, certainly, than I thought they were going to be.
Yeah, I think it all came from that opening Friday night game, because Cast probably have a reputation for not travelling very well and not being that fussed. They were handfuls of Cast travelling fans. That must be a really select club of Cast fans that would travel to Franklin's Gardens on a Friday night. But the fact that they went so close, one thing that shows is that, it started the weekend in such a positive mood and it just kept going thereafter. But I think subsequently, you look at the Toulouse-Bordeaux results and the instinct is to go, France are just so much better than England. But It's not. It's just that Toulouse and Bordeaux are better than everyone else. We are living in the duopoly now of the two greatest club sides in the world, in the first two main provincial centres outside of Paris in French rugby. They are just better than everyone else, and we'll get onto it shortly. But the last 2-3 seasons, it's been about them and everyone else in European rugby.
I did think reading Will Collier's column Friday in Saturday's paper, brilliant column, and it stands. I'd go back and read it if you haven't read it. Fantastic perspective on life and food in French rugby. But I read that, and I knew that Castres were going to rock up. And we've all been to plenty of Castres away games where they haven't, and they've left key players at home, and they've decided to focus on the league and all of that. Like they were up for it, and it made it a brilliant contest because they had a point to prove. You know, the Henry Pollock basketball celebrations, and they were finding motivation from the crap food laid on for them in the Northampton hotels, as Will had explained even on the ruck. They found some motivation and they went for it, and it made a great opening, and I thought it really set the tone for the round of 16.
And then we saw it again in the game you were at in terms of Bath Sarries, where that game in the Prem a few weeks ago was an absolute demolition and hell of a lot closer. Yeah,
loads. And actually, similar start in that Saracens were 10-0 up, and they were 10 up at half time on Saturday. They'd had a 10-0 lead in that league game a couple of weeks back, and then collapsed to the point where Mark McCall was accusing the players of giving up, openly questioning the fight of the team. But what did they really want? Well, he got the reaction. He's actually had the reaction in the last 2 weeks because they gave a really good account of themselves against Northampton at the Tottenham Stadium, just lost. They had the wind behind them in the first half and used it well, 10-0 up, dominating the set piece, winning scrum penalties, and they were in a good position. But Bath just have depth, they have experience, they understand how to win these games. And they chose to play into the wind first half. So they had the wind behind them. It was a strong win second half. But they also brought on Thomas du Toit at half time, who fixed the scrum issues immediately. And that just denied Saracens a route back into the game. And bang, suddenly in 10 minutes, it's 14-10 to Bath. And Saracens never gave in. They didn't do what they did 2 weeks ago. They kept banging away, and they carved Bath open. They get to the line, and they are one pass away from scoring to retake the lead. And Marco Riccioni's pass is just behind Andy Onyama-Christie, sort of shoulder height. He can't hold it, spills. 2 passes, Cockersinger's away, and they score length of the field. And that 14-point swing was the defining moment in the game that was sort of based on Thomas du Toit coming on, the scrum turns, and then the wreck is lively and rocking. And Sarries don't go away, but the moment that Bath score from the length of the field, the gap's too big. But it was a proper contest, and you know, at Bath we sit right behind the away coaching team and analysts, and it's just I took as much fascination just watching Mark McCall, because this was the last game that really mattered for him.
Well, I was going to say that's part of the thing here, right?
Yeah.
For Sarries is they're out of the top 4 race, basically. Maybe not mathematically, but they're not going to get top 4 in the Prem.
No.
They're out of Europe.
Yeah.
And Mark McCall, who has been this guy that has been there through an incredible period of success, it is just kind of petering out.
Yeah, I think they're still a team capable of delivering on a one-off day. They beat Toulouse. They played really well, I thought, on Saturday. They're just not as good as Bath, which is no disgrace in English context. But as the wreck is jumping and they've scored a 100-metre try, I looked just in front of me to the right at Mark McCall, who was emotionless outwardly, as he often is, and unmoved, but his mind must have been going in a million miles an hour, because this was all they had left to play for, and they were unlikely to win it. You know, Elgan's talked about the powerhouses in France, and Bath and Northampton are the best teams in England, so they were always unlikely to win it, but this was all they had left. And speaking to him afterwards, the question was put to him about, well, that's the end of your relationship with the Champions Cup. And he sort of took a moment and he said, I hadn't really thought of it like that. And he was part of the Ulster team that won it in '99, injured for the final, but helped lift the trophy, won it 3 times as director of rugby with Saracens. And then he said, well, we framed the rest of the season by trying to build some experience into the younger lads so that I've got something to hand over in the summer to Brendan Venter. And that's it. That's
where they are.
That's where they are. That's the season done.
I'm glad Alex mentioned the Mark McCall as a player thing, because when the coaches have story with this competition as well, it adds to the magic and the gravitas that we talk about the history of this competition. Pat Lam being another one who won it as captain with Northampton in 2000. So whenever people say to him, you're going to rest players for this trip to South Africa, for this game against Toulouse that people aren't expecting you to win, he'll always say, no, we're going to go at it full throttle because I know what this tournament's about, because I've been there and I've done it and I've won it.
100%. And Mark described it as a magic competition, a great competition. And Alex Sanderson at Sale was making a similar point in the week about a guy who's played in it, about that they hate sending weak teams abroad, and he feels they've been forced into making these kind of decisions, but they don't want to. And as you say, the players who've experienced the magic of it, as Mark McCall calls it, particularly when you get to this part of the competition, they know it is something special. It's a competition that delivers that kind of cross-border, cross-culture tribalism that no other competition does.
And actually, on the point of teams rotating and it often being a problem, we saw what can be so good about when the South African teams don't rotate, because the Bulls against Glasgow, who are a really good team, we'll speak to Mark more about them in just a moment, gave it a really good go. And then let's do the Toulon Stormers, because what a game, by the way. Yeah. What a crazy, crazy ending. And what an opportunity for the Stormers to have won away in France. Like, a great opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, you have to say they blew it.
Yeah, to the end of the game, I think I might get some of the timeline of this wrong, but with a minute left or virtually the clock in the red, both teams turned the ball over. There was then a knock-on that was going to give Toulon a scrum, which you thought then would end the game, but they came back for the high tackle from Mar Nonu. Stormers kicked to the corner. Even though they had the tee on, Feinberg Mngomezulu was thinking about kicking it, and he has a boot on him, by the way. I remember watching the game a couple of years ago that South Africa played at Twickenham against Wales, where one of these matches that they bring up north and they sell loads of tickets at Twickenham. And I was watching him in the warm-up bang over penalties from 55 metres. He's got that in his locker, but they decide not to go for the points. They kick to the corner. They go through the phases. They're in a great position. They don't opt for a drop goal, and eventually they then get held up over the line, and that's the game.
Well, first thing, if the tee's on, I think you have to take the goal.
I would have thought
that was my understanding of it.
I didn't know whether they thought the penalty was in a different spot to where it was. Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe. I'm not too sure.
But they're also Nonu got sin bin, so Toulon are defending with 13.
Yeah,
and Stormers kick for touch. They rumble from 25 out, and they're on the goal line, and they're pounding away. And I'm watching it in the stand at the Rec, thinking, well, just drop the goal. There's no pressure. You've had enough phases that Toulon are having to defend the pick and go. They have to. So they'll have no one charging.
It's a chip shot.
It's a chip shot from in front. You've got to take it. And they get over the line, and Olinvon, who he seems to sort of manoeuvre his legs underneath.
John Dobson wasn't happy. They thought that he was offside, didn't they? The Stormers, I think, weren't.
Yeah, and I thought that's what they would be studying on the TMO, but they were just looking for a grounding.
The drop goal issue, it's something that obviously we talk about all the time when people are near the try line. I think modern players are so unfamiliar with it as a method of scoring that they probably view it as a really low percentage option, whereas they probably view the pick and go as the more likely method of scoring. Whereas there would have been a time where players would score more drop goals than tries in a game in the season.
The World Cup in the quarterfinal in Cardiff, the France-New Zealand quarterfinal. If Dan Carter lines up a drop goal, they win the quarterfinal against France in 2007. But they just don't even think of it, and they got loads of criticism then for being almost with the All Blacks, we will just score tries. 4 years earlier, England won a World Cup on the back of, and they won Grand Slams on the back of drop goals. It's sort of wild, really, that George Ford is the sort of seemingly the only frontline 10 for whom that will be a genuine option. Finn Russell doesn't doesn't go drop goals either.
Had it a few years ago, didn't we, with Finn Russell, where it became, I can't remember what game it was, where it was a big thing ahead of it of would you kick a drop goal? I think Finn Russell was like, I don't think I've ever kicked a drop goal in my whole career.
Yeah.
So no.
Yeah.
Like, why not? It's such a great...
But as you say, it can be depending where you are, but in this particular situation, with the quality of 10 who's going to be taking the drop goal and the lack of pressure that there would be because they were camped on their line, Toulon, that was a high percentage attempt, I think. It's very different to, say, when Ford got charged down at Murrayfield, where Scotland were defending really aggressively. England kind of botched the whole build-up, and he should have pulled out of it, as we know. I don't think any of that would have been a problem for Stormers, and then they'd have gone through. But once again, the South African teams just failed to go deep in the Champions Cup.
And also, they'd put themselves in a position to win the game, having it look like they were going to be out of it. They scored a try late on, make it a 1-point game. They get themselves down in scoring position to win it. And
but that's what that's what these great games deliver. These moments. You don't. Sometimes you think the game has to be like that for 80 minutes. It often doesn't. It just needs. It needs those moments where everyone's holding their breath. What's going to happen next? And you could talk about the 14-point swing at the Rec as being a moment that just defined a game, and that's what you remember. Props would remember Thomas Du Toit and everything he did, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it's that everything builds to this crescendo, and he's over the line. And everyone's holding their breath. Who has won this game? It's magic. I love it.
Is the counter argument to everything we've said and the positive stuff to do with the Champions Cup encapsulated in Harlequins' sale?
Well,
in some ways, half empty stadium.
Yeah, but I
game.
Sort of hold them as the exception that proves the rule. Really, it's sort of slightly odd. The pool stages were slightly odd in that Toulouse ended up being ranked so low. Quins and Sale, who are really struggling in the Prem, both end up making it round of 16. Now Sale are through to the quarters. You don't have to be flying in the Prem to get through, as Northampton showed last year. But Northampton are a better team than both of these clubs, and it definitely gives lie to the EPCR sort of a view that the competition is selling out everywhere and is brilliant everywhere. I thought it was really strong with big crowds in a lot of games this weekend. But it's two poor teams in a stadium where the ticket prices were not cheap. Like the worst seats were still 50 quid. They're playing again in a couple of weeks in the game in the Prem, for which season ticket holders already have in their package. Neither of these teams are going to win the competition, which I don't think should matter. But I think if you're feeling so negative about your club as Quins fans currently are, I'm not surprised there were 6,000-7,000 unsold.
With Harlequins, it's more about their performance last year than this year, because I think a lot of the debate is with how low they finished in the table last year, should they have made it into the elite European competition this year? Because this year, actually, fair play, they went to La Rochelle and won. So once you're in the competition, they did great things to get that far. Look at Toulon as an example. They're 11th in the top 14 this season. They're sort of in that similar zone to Harlequins. It's just that so much of the air has come out of Harlequins' season since that La Rochelle win in January, which no one saw coming. It's just, we talk about how a competition can offer, a different competition can offer so much respite, and the likes of Northampton, as you say, can go so deep in one competition when they're going badly in another one. But the air has just gone out of Harlequins so much that even that didn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
One really quick newsy point just off the back of this game, which I think is worth noting, particularly given the fact that a lot of the time, Alex, we're covering England in international periods, is Luke Cowan-Dickey's injury.
And Bevan Rodd.
And Bevan Rodd.
Yeah.
In particular, I look at hooker because we spoke about this through the Six Nations and an issue of depth there. Jamie George was being asked to do a lot of work again, which was like throwback to 2023 World Cup, wasn't it? What do you think it means for Steve Borthwick with that trip to South Africa coming up in terms of England's hooker options?
Well, I think he was going to have to do this anyway, because he'd evidently lost faith in Luke Cowan-Dickey's line-out work, if nothing else, and partly the sort of his discipline, his tendency to give away those no-arm tackle, chop tackle penalties, which cost England a lot in the Six Nations. I think he was going to have to look at alternatives anyway, bridge the gap to the next generation, and now he has to. So it'll probably be a good thing for England in a way. That the interesting thing is who is top of the list. Obviously, Theo Dan came off the bench for Saracens. He's been in and around England now for years. Again, another hooker whose set piece isn't trusted. But you look at the way that Kepu Tuipulotu plays, I would have thought he's top of the list. I know Nathan Jabulu, really useful to have a hooker who can play back row as he has done, and maybe in the world of hybrid and versatility, the kind of shout Brits type player who you could include, Dion Fourie, who could cover two positions, could be really valuable in a World Cup setup. But I think Tuipulotu, they wanted to secure him as English, the RFU. He's on their kind of rapid pathway. He's playing more now towards the end of this season. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if he benefits from Cowendicky's injury. And maybe Craig Wright, who won the Under-20s World Cup in that same team as Henry Pollock and Archie McParland. They like him. Obviously Nathan Jabulu, but I think probably Kepu Tuipulotu.
Yeah, I think he's probably at the front of the queue. Gabriel Ogre might have an option as well. And again, similar type of player. He maybe isn't as he's not going to start the game at 6, but he's the type of player that if he had to fill in a back row position like 6 or 7 later on in the game in terms of hybrid, then he'd have the ability to do that as well. You'd think. Yeah,
I agree. The fascinating element though, for a player like Gabriel Ogre and Kepu Tuipulotu, is how much is there much more of the Theo Dan mould of a hooker, the sort of Dan Sheehan, like super athlete, highly skilled, wants to play in the open spaces and create things. And I don't know if that's the hooker that Steve Borthwick particularly wants in his pack.
Alfie Barbery's got to practice his throwing again.
Yeah,
and scrummaging.
Yeah, I mean, his move from hooker to back row was sort of engineered by Eddie Jones. He wasn't that keen to stay at hooker, but if Eddie Jones had told him you need to stay at hooker while he was at Wasps, he probably would have done. But he went through that period. His transition from an under-20s hooker to a senior back row largely came because Wasps needed him to play back row at that point. So he made his breakthrough into the Premiership, into senior rugby as a back rower, and then Eddie Jones told him to stay there. And so actually, you do wonder, had he remained a hooker, he might have been in that perfect sweet spot now to be the guy.
It's rare for it to go that way as well, because we're quite accustomed now to seeing 6s turning into 2s. Yeah. I think Derry Lake's an example of someone that kind of moved forward to hooker, and obviously he did so well captaining Wales in the Six Nations as well. So yeah, strange for it to have been done the other way around.
And it happens a lot in academies now as well, I think.
I was going to say, you hear about so many players that start in the centres and then they slowly it's like a black hole that just draws them into the front row. If I can flag just a couple of pieces in terms of the hooker situation in England, Barnsley has been writing about Tuipulotu, and then the back end of last week we had an interview with Nathan Jabulu as well, so go and check them out. If I can finish off on terms of the last 16, I think it's worth just highlighting again or sitting with the point that you mentioned right at the top, Alex, of the style of rugby that Toulouse and Bordeaux are playing at the moment, which you watched front and centre, Elgan, in terms of the way in which they approach the game, the attacking flair, fairly even first opening to the period between Leicester, and then as we've seen so often these teams do, Bordeaux bang, 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 and they're out of sight by half-time.
It's a combination of things. It's you go back to the 1980s when Toulouse, sort of not the first great Toulouse team, but when Toulouse became great again after a long period of drought, and the Pierre Villepreux school that still informs everything Toulouse now. It's all about finding space, whether that's out wide, whether that's in the middle. It's all about just anticipating where the ball is going to be and where you need to be to get into space from an offload. I think Pierre Villepreux doesn't refer to them as offloads. They're all passes. It's just whether it's in contact, before contact, whatever. And that informs what Toulouse do, what France do, and what Bordeaux are doing right now. It helps that obviously they've got brilliantly talented players in forwards and backs who can do all of that. Also helps that they can win collisions over the gain line, which enables them to get forward and to do that. But yeah, you're just looking throughout that Bordeaux and Toulouse team. It'd be obviously it's impossible for ever to happen, but individually they're probably better than the France national team because they're club teams, the two best club teams in the world. The way they go at it, it can just be unstoppable. I think the figure on Sunday at the Stade Chaban Delmar was that Bordeaux had made 27 offloads and Leicester had made 2. And Jeff Parling said afterwards that I think the average in a Prem game is 9. So, it's a different style of playing that once they get going, it's just so difficult to stop.
But it's when you explain it, the Villepreux style, it sounds so simple. It's just go forward, and if you can't go forward, move it to space where you can go forward, which is just sounds really basic, but it's a mindset thing. So you'll often see Toulouse and Bordeaux, particularly the big carriers, they'll be going forward. If they engage in the duel, they will just shovel the basketball pass out the back. It's not about they just don't want to die with the ball, because if you die with the ball, if you create a ruck, you give the defence a chance to set. So the whole thing is just about playing fluid rugby, keeping the ball alive, going forward, and finding space. And if you can't go forward, you move the ball, even if it's what looks like an unconventional shovel pass or a little like one-handed over the top or whatever it is, to then find space where you then can go forward. And that's really it. But it's a total mindset shift from that to the kind of pod work, organised structure of playing 3 phases and then box kick. It's not that you don't see these teams box kicking when they need to, but it's a mindset difference. And I don't know really why that can't become all rugby. Like why does rugby have to be this sort of such an organised, structured sport? A lot of it, I think, is coaching control.
Do you think you need a team to win a World Cup where that is the way in which they play to be able to set the standards for everyone else?
It would definitely help.
Do you know what I mean?
You've seen a lot of teams with, and World Cups historically have not won that way.
Set piece, kick pressure.
Pressure affects so much. Because then with pressure, with jeopardy, throwing the offload or the pass out of contact or shoveling the ball backwards because you trust someone's going to be there, that takes the risk of that grows because the jeopardy is so much greater. But yes, we're seeing teams winning Europe playing like that.
We've seen France play like that. Obviously they've had ebbs and flows, but we've seen that be their ethos for the past 40 years. And I think there are acolytes in Britain of that Villepreux way. There are sort of schoolboy courses where you can learn to play this freedom of movement style. But I think if you spoke to a lot of these coaches, they'd tell you that there's just still a lot of resistance in this country.
There is coaching resistance.
Yeah, it's coaching resistance to fully buying into such methods.
Well, Ben Pegner, who we've had on the pod, is one of those. He goes and coaches. He spends time in France with Pierre Villepreux. He learns the methodology. And he was a real believer in it. And it produces highly skilled players. But it's also not one-dimensional. If you think back to the Tottenham Stadium, the Champions Cup final, when Toulouse beat Leinster, my abiding memory of Toulouse winning that game is Antoine Dupont playing like an auxiliary back rower, doing what is necessary, winning turnovers. So it's not a one-dimensional, high-risk style of rugby. And it's not, and I think that's the other point. They don't see it as a risk. Obviously, the bigger the game, the more jeopardy there is, but they don't see it as playing risky rugby. It's rugby. Whereas I think there's a mindset in the UK that actually it's safer to play a more ordered, structured game because you might cut out, you leave less scope for an error. But I think you look at the way that Toulouse won that final. It required other elements to their game, but that's what I mean. It's not a one size fits. It's a mindset thing of when it's on, you just don't you back your skill set and you look for space and you try to keep the ball off the floor. Because that's what rugby should be.
And because of the manner in which France, Toulouse, Bordeaux can strike so quickly from turnover ball, they'd actually tell you that kicking, chasing and defending is a huge part of the game because that's how they win the back and then they just score before you've been able to do anything about it.
No, I was going to say it's still like good set piece, good kicking game is still important. Like you're not going to be the best team in Europe and win the Champions Cup without that, but so much of their identity comes from the other stuff which maybe we're more resistant to in this part of the world.
It's like a cricketing analogy where someone who is a T20 slogger might say, but I can only do that because I've got a solid defence, which is what Viv Richards would have said back in the day, or I've heard Jacob Ethel say it as well. He knows when his forward defence is in working order, that's when he knows he can also slog sweep for 6.
Yeah. Well, Are Toulouse and Bordeaux the best two teams remaining in the Champions Cup? Well, one side that may be standing in their way or would certainly look to challenge them could be Glasgow. Next up, we're going to have a chat with Mark Palmer, our man north of the border, to reflect on Glasgow's victory over the Bulls, their tilt at the URC and the Champions Cup, and also Edinburgh putting up a much better fight against Leinster than many expected. Mark on the way, and then the other side of that, we'll look ahead to the quarterfinals and tee up the Women's Six Nations this weekend. So, Mark, great to have you back on the pod. Straight back from Dublin, onto the ruck. This is the sort of commitment that we like to the pod. We appreciate it.
No rest for the wicked, but always a pleasure.
Look, Mark, I want to get on to Glasgow in just a moment, but you've made the journey back from Edinburgh's game against Leinster. A tighter match than perhaps you expected?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, if you'd said to me yesterday morning that there was going to be an 80-point game at the Aviva, then we'd definitely have been fearing the worst. But no, it was a very odd affair. Slightly ridiculous in places. 12 tries. Yeah, Leinster handing at least 3 of them on a plate to Edinburgh. So Edinburgh managed to score, I think, 5 tries without really having any attack. A couple of moments of individual brilliance, particularly from Darcy Graham. But at one point, around the hour, they're actually ahead in the game, and you're thinking, what on earth's happening here? But that Leinster power game really kind of came to the fore late on, and we ended up with the result that we thought we would. But certainly margin-wise, it was a lot more respectable and a lot more hard fought than probably anticipated.
What did you make of Leinster, Mark? We're about to come on and preview the quarterfinals that we've got coming up this weekend, and no doubt we're going to be waxing lyrical about Toulouse and Bordeaux, and from our English perspective, Bath Northampton is really intriguing. But what about Leinster, a team that are so often thought of as one of the favourites for this competition, but the perception, maybe they're not quite the force we've seen in previous years? What did you actually make of them in the flesh?
Yeah, they've had a real up and down season generally. A really bad start in the URC, have picked up considerably since probably around that November test period. But again, they tend to make a struggle of every game, even the games that they end up winning. There's some kind of real troughs, and again that was the case yesterday. They don't manage the game as well as we're so used to seeing from Leinster teams in terms of just throttling the life out of opponents. As I said, they handed 3 tries on a plate to Edinburgh with intercepts, which is, you wouldn't have thought from Leinster you'd get that in a season, never mind in one half. So, clearly have still got some excellent individual talent. And again, when they did go route one in the second half and turned up the power, it was a really kind of formidable weapon. But yeah, albeit that, they've got so many big game winners in there, I don't see them going the distance in this competition. And I think, I would expect them to win that quarter-final. They'll have enough to beat Sale. But if they run into Glasgow in Scotland in the semi-final, then I think that'll probably be the end of the road for them.
Glasgow must be delighted to be on the side of the draw that they're on. You talk about Leinster not being the vintage team. They had another statement win against the Bulls. They have Toulon at home. They must be looking at the other side of the draw with Bordeaux and Toulouse and Bath and Saints, thinking this is a prime opportunity.
Absolutely, and it has really opened up for them on the back of their their pool campaign, and you should get some reward, shouldn't you, for a perfect pool campaign with 20 points from a possible 20. Albeit Bulls as 15th seeds, they're a pretty good side to be in 15th position going into that round of 16. That was a really hard fought win for Glasgow, and I think was testament to just how many layers they've developed under Franco Smith, particularly probably in the last 18 months, that, yes, they have the kind of crash bang wallop pyrotechnics that we're so used to seeing, that attacking flair, but they can, like we're talking about with Leinster, they can go route one as well, they can dig it out, they can be just as effective on the other side of the ball, and that was a real kind of gritty determination and kind of foul conditions that saw them through.
How much was the weather a real leveller there, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, it was grim, even by Scotstoun standards. It's always terrible at Scotstoun, as you know. But it was very windy, particularly that first half when the Bulls had the wind at their backs. They would have been looking to turn around with a much healthier lead than 2 points. It always felt more than a 2-point wind. And Glasgow have been very adept, in both competitions this year at using those conditions to their advantage. They don't don't have any issue with falling behind. They always back themselves in the second half to then come back, as they get against Toulouse, and to know the conditions, to know which areas of the pitch to play in. There was a real sort of composure and controlled element to that performance, as I said.
But Glasgow strike me, Mark, as a team who, yes, they can use the conditions, and the Toulouse game was a game I was thinking of, pretty inhospitable for a team from the south of France. But Glasgow are a team who, when the weather turns and if they're playing in sunny springtime conditions, can also thrive. They're not just a team that rely on inclement weather.
Absolutely, as I say, I think they've got so many different kind of layers and pieces of armour to go to now, and that, that's what all truly great sides and sides that end up winning competitions have, isn't it? They can, they've got more than one string to their bow. They're not fixed on playing a certain way, and only playing the way that the conditions or the opposition allow them to. They're adaptable. They've got resilience. They've got a kind of all-court game that can come out in any set of circumstances.
How exciting is it, Mark, that this is a Glasgow team that you look at now, the Champions Cup, the best in Europe plus South Africa, and they really have a shot at winning this competition?
It's really exciting, and I think it is literally unprecedented for a Scottish team to be in that position. Meanwhile, they're also balancing being their league campaign as well. They've got a healthy lead at the top of the table there, so there's a real confidence that they've got the squad and the capability to kind of go deep in both. And it is lining up for them. You'd think that's a tough but winnable quarter-final against Toulon, and then again they have the home country advantage for the semi-final. It would be at Murrayfield for Leinster. So it's all there for them. Big games that they're going to have to win, but again, they've done that previously in the most difficult of circumstances on the road, and when they won the league. So what an opportunity they have.
How do you, when you compare them to, or when you look at the teams remaining, how do you view Glasgow within that? I think a lot of people would look at Bordeaux and Toulouse, for example. I know Toulouse's seeding dropped off a bit, but arguably as the two best teams still in the competition. But how do you see Glasgow fitting into the picture with these 8 teams remaining?
I would think you're right. I think Bordeaux and potentially Toulouse, although Glasgow would probably argue that point given what happened in December. But I think those two on the left-hand side of the draw do sit on a plane above everybody else. But I think Glasgow would then be the next cab off the rank in terms of, as I say, that ability to kind of manage different conditions, different contexts, and on the road and at home. So. Yeah, you would anticipate that the winner is going to come from the other side of the draw, but I think Glasgow should be, they have every right to think they can be right in that mix.
It's funny, isn't it, what a couple of months does, Mark? If we look back to November and you think about Scotland and there were questions, not seeing out those big games, or the collapse against Argentina, not seeing out the game against the All Blacks, and then all of a sudden they've had a Six Nations where, all right, I know they lost the last game, but I think you could argue it was their best Six Nations campaign that we've seen, going to the final weekend with a shot at the title. You've got Glasgow that are right at the top of the URC, that are genuine contenders in Europe. It is the picture, and I appreciate it's a fickle old business and these things change quickly, but the picture pretty rosy at the moment in terms of rugby north of the border.
I wouldn't potentially go that far. I think the SRU would be very grateful for Glasgow because they're the bit that works and has worked for any number of years now. Edinburgh, for all we're praising them for kind of digging in and showing resilience yesterday in Dublin. The season in general has been another write-off for them. They've flattered to deceive us. They just about always do. And Scotland, as you say, some encouraging signs and good results in that competition, but still it's a mid-table finish. Maybe that is the limit of our ambition. I would like to think not, but no, I wouldn't say it's rosy. I would say certainly Glasgow's very rosy, but the rest of it probably still lagging well behind.
Well, what Glasgow have to look forward to is that quarter-final this weekend. Mark, we really appreciate you joining the Ruck, as always, and hopefully we'll be speaking to you quite a lot over the next few months with all Glasgow's exploits.
Yes, indeed.
The positive part of the Scottish game, then, we'll say that.
Tremendous. Thanks very much, lads.
So, pleasure as always to have Mark Palmer on the pod. We might be having him on a lot more regularly in the next few weeks, depending on how Glasgow go in the URC and the Champions Cup. So, Alex, Elgan finishes off Bath, Northampton, Glasgow, Toulon, Leinster, Sale, Bordeaux, Toulouse. 4 really, really good matches, but is by some distance Bordeaux-Toulouse the most mouth-watering of all of them?
We are living in the age of the Garonne. So, I mean, Bordeaux and Toulouse, great cathedrals of rugby. They get 30,000 people to home games. They've contested the last 2 top 14 finals, which does not happen very often that 2 teams contest 2 in a row. And who's to say they're not going to contest a third in the row now? In the last 2 Champions Cups, they will have met in the semi-final last year, which Bordeaux won to win the Champions Cup, and Toulouse, who won the Champions Cup the year before that. And now we're looking at them meeting in the quarterfinals, and everyone thinking that whoever wins will again go all the way. So this is, like as I said earlier, this is the Bordeaux and Toulouse duopoly of the age. They are the 2 great club teams in the world, not just in terms of the players they have, the way they play, but also the cities, the grounds, the love for the game in those cities. You just have to look at the matchups that we could be having on Sunday. You've got Dupont v Luku, Jalibert v Antimac, perhaps Chocobares v Moafana, Penaud v Gorg, BLBRA versus Teddy Thomas, Ramos versus Salesi Rayasi, and then we haven't even mentioned Miafu, Flamand, Woki, and Tamafuna up front. So everything about it should just be an absolutely spellbinding occasion.
Amazing. I mean, you did the double this weekend. We've spoken on the pod before about encouraging anyone who can get to a Bordeaux game or a Toulouse game to do it. But just explain what the colour, they get there so early. The bands, the flares, the flags. It's such a special occasion around the match.
Yeah, so they're both cities with 2 grounds. They've got the rugby ground and the football ground. Toulouse, they've got the Stade de Soissons, which is obviously a great ground, but it's actually quite small. It's only about 20,000, maybe not even that, seats. So they upgraded to the Stadium de Toulouse, which is the football ground. They call it the Petit Wembley, the Little Wembley, because it looks a bit like the old Wembley in a different part of the city. We got there about 2-3 hours before kick-off, and there were a group of people tailgating in the car park. They had prawn on a barbecue. They'd been there since 11 a.m. In a way that you just don't see in Britain quite so much. So the atmosphere is just there straight away. Obviously, it's a big city. It's the grandest rugby club in the world. They are the aristocrats of world rugby. So they've got all that history. Bordeaux, very different story. Obviously, they've got 2 historic clubs, but they merged 20 years ago. So it's this funny situation where you've got the great rivals of the age. One of them's got 25 Bouclier de Brennus and 7 European titles, and the other one's got 1 European title and 0 top 14 titles, albeit the 2 clubs that formed them originally do have some national titles going back. But in Bordeaux, I mean, it's just been what a successful merger it's been over the past 20 years, because that city is now all about rugby. You've got the southern suburb of Bègles mixed with the Stade Bordelais side in the north. The Stade Chaban-Delmas. I was reading that piece in the Sunday Times about Italian football that John Foote wrote about these crumbling stadiums. I was walking around the Stade Chaban-Delmas, I was thinking, this kind of looks like in a crumbling Italian football stadium, but it just feels proper old school, proper amphitheatrical as it is, in the old school manner it is. They get 32,000 basically every week, and then for the odd big game, they'll move up to the football ground, the Mamou Atlantique, where they can get 42,000. So just the passion within those cities, the support for them, the players they have, the way they play, it's just as good as anything European rugby has seen ever.
Is there any part of it a shame that it is a quarter-final and not a final, or is it Toulouse messed up the pool stage, that's your seeding, and it's such a mouth-watering quarter-final that who cares?
Well, yeah, it is a shame, but I think we were going to see them play at some point, and in some ways, it does open up other really nice narratives. So you got the idea that as I mentioned earlier, the 2 best in France will meet whoever wins between the 2 best in England, and on the other side of the draw, I mean, you mentioned it before we came on air, but without wanting to nick your stat, when was the last time there was a club from 4 different countries in the...
I believe it's only happened twice, and the last time was 2002. So, yeah, we're looking at possibly Glasgow v Leinster on one side, and, yeah, the best team in France against the best team in England on the other side.
Yeah, so, I mean, it feels like the obvious final because they are pretty much the 2 best teams in Europe. But actually having it this early does open a narrative where we could have Glasgow and Leinster through... could have Bath or Northampton there as well. It makes it feel like a proper European competition.
And as Mark said as well, Glasgow would have something to say about it, given what happened in the pool stages in terms of a Toulouse in that conversation.
Yeah, mind you, Saracens beat Toulouse as well.
Yeah, true.
The Glasgow one will be fascinating because, with how close teams like Llanelli, Scarlets, Cardiff have come in Wales, such gutting semi-finals, they're actually, in a very Welsh way, a very wistful reminiscence of, we all came so close to winning Europe. It happened quite a few times to those clubs. But for Scotland, they've only got Edinburgh's near miss of 2012 when they lost to Ulster by 3 points in the semi-finals. They'd beaten Toulouse in the quarterfinals. So Scotland perhaps doesn't have that long list of wistful near misses that Wales has in this competition. So now suddenly you've got Glasgow as the great hope, and second seeds, maximum points in the pool stage. It would be, some shock if they did go all the way, but they put themselves in a position where it's not beyond the realms of possibility.
And in Bath, Northampton, a possible precursor to the Prem final at the end of the season?
I would have thought so, yeah.
It's intriguing, that, isn't it?
Yeah, well, just think back to December when Northampton sent a sort of mid-second string to the record and won. One of the great performances of the season. Bath have got such quality, such depth. So I asked Fergus Burke about it because Saracens have played Saints and Bath on back-to-back weekends, and they just see Bath as being just the physicality that they can bring with the pack they have, and then the six on the bench, which includes Thomas du Toit coming on and Francois Van Veek, who came on and made a huge difference on the other side of the scrum. That physicality gives a platform for Ben Spencer, Finn Russell, Max Ajomo and Ollie Lawrence, who dovetail so effectively in midfield. They are a force. But if there's a team who can work out how to beat them, it would be Northampton, because they did it in December.
What's great about these potential games is that it tees up revenge narratives for later on in the season, because when Bordeaux frankly wiped the floor with Toulouse in last season's semi-final, they were still hurting about the 59-3 top 14 final defeat. And they still haven't beaten Toulouse in that top 14 final, because we had the ridiculous final last season that went to extra time and finished 39-33. So even though they've done a job on them in Europe, there are still passions and desires and things that people want to get revenge for. And it's possible that we might have a similar Bath-Northampton storyline later this season as well.
To finish us off then on the quarter-final, something we asked last week ahead of the last 16 was EPCR would be praying for an away win, and they got it in Sale against Quins, but I don't view that as a big shock European knockout, surprise in it really. So if we look at the matches this weekend, Bath Northampton, Glasgow Toulon, Leinster Sale, Bordeaux Toulouse, what is the most likely shock if one is going to come from any of those matches?
I think it's Northampton and Bath, because I think there's just something about Northampton in Europe in recent seasons.
Yeah.
They've been a really good just European team. Obviously, Toulouse-Bordeaux, I mean, it's really 50-50 about who could win. The fact it's in Bordeaux tilts it in their direction, but it wouldn't really be a shock either way, because they're both so mammoth. Whereas, if Northampton were to win at the Rec, that would simultaneously be a shock, but also something that wouldn't be unlike them to do it.
Yeah, because as I said, they won down there so well after the autumn internationals. I wonder how much Glasgow would like Storm David to keep blowing through the city for a few more days, just to make it as inhospitable as possible for Toulon. As off it as Leinster seem to be compared to their normal standards, I don't see them tripping up.
Yeah, 4 really good matches, though. We'll look back on them all on next Monday's pod. To finish off, lads, Women's Six Nations gets underway this coming weekend. France, Italy, England, Ireland, which is happening at Allianz Stadium, Twickenham, and Wales against Scotland. Elgan, England aiming for an 8th Six Nations title in a row.
Yes, well, obviously, we go back, 7 months now to that great day at Twickenham, where almost 82,000 people watched the Red Roses finally become world champions. Everything, a lot of what we thought would happen since then, entering the sporting firmament, TV appearances, book deals, those things have happened. But now they're getting back to the nuts and bolts, back at Twickenham, more than 70,000 tickets sold as it stands. In another way, it's the same old story, because it's who can anyone stop an English Grand Slam? And you'd probably think no, although there is a likely usual decider perhaps against France in France on the final weekend. But they've won 33 games in a row, and Zoe Stratford, who will be absent as captain, Meg Jones taking over because Zoe Stratford is taking time out, one of 3 players taking time out with pregnancy at the moment. She said in an interview with me at the start of the year, why don't we go another World Cup cycle without losing? So that would be maybe 66 games without losing.
But that's the fascinating question, I think, for this team now, in that they had this not getting over the line at a World Cup for such a long time, plus coupled with a home World Cup, which we always knew was going to be mega. This team that wasn't losing, they won that home World Cup. What becomes the motivation now? But by the sounds of it, the noises coming out of the Red Roses camp is, well, let's do it all over again. And John Mitchell has spoken about wanting to be the greatest sports team ever, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, for now, it's the motivation is that first British and Irish Lions women's tour as well next year, which, although the fixture list isn't as grand as the men's one, it is something that the women's game is greatly looking forward to, and certainly a lot of players want to be a part of that. It's obviously defending the World Cup title in 2029 in Australia. There actually won't be a huge amount of regeneration for the Red Roses because a lot of the players are of an age where they'll just still be here in 2029. Then obviously this is a long way down the line, but it's interesting to see what happens in the generation after that, because actually there are some question marks over what's coming next after this generation of Red Roses. Actually, England under-18 lost to Wales in the under-18 festival last weekend. But that is a long way down the line. In the here and now, I don't think it would be a massively bold prediction to say that they might win 66 games in a row, which would almost get to a level where it would be one defeat in about 100 matches because they'd won 30 in a row prior to the World Cup final defeat as well.
And we're also at the stage with the Red Roses. It's mad that it's their first game in 7 months since winning the World Cup. But to get 70,000 after all that time into Twickenham, with everyone knowing that how dominant they are, that the support for the Red Roses isn't contingent on jeopardy and on the level of competition. It's a very different style of backing for that team than the England men's team have. That, as you say, Ellie Kildare on posters and on the tannoy at Heathrow Airport and book deals, and they're buying into the characters and the people of this team rather than turning up wanting to see a humdinger of a test match.
It's watching a TV show or a play where you know how it ends, by and large, a lot of the time. Yeah. Obviously, so much of it is incumbent on the other nations now to be dragged up by what the Red Roses, which again is something we've been talking about for several years. But if you're looking, like I say, some green shoots with young Welsh players coming through, there's going to be a really good crowd at Ashton Gate by all accounts for the England-Wales game. Also, you now got Scotland playing at Murrayfield for the first time for what will be a record crowd there in the second round. So there are still improvements from the other teams that aren't the Red Roses. It's just that every time they improve slightly, the Red Roses actually have improved by even more.
So where are we? If England are still far and away the favourites and we expect them to do the Grand Slam, where are we with everyone else? France still the closest team to them, and then where in terms of Italy, Ireland, Wales, Scotland do those teams sit?
Well, as Alex says, because it's been 7 months since a game, obviously we don't have any real international form to go off. We can only go off what it's been like for the last 5 years, where France give a good account of themselves but fall just short. Wales, Scotland and Ireland oscillate and can each beat each other. Oh, I shouldn't leave out Italy in that regard either. Can all oscillate and beat anyone on their day. So we're looking for any of those countries to get some surer improvement, to give France a good go, give England a good go. But everyone's expecting, until we see some evidence on the field, that we think it'll just go the same way as usual.
What's the WXV plan this year? Because the Six Nations takes on importance because historically the Six Nations has been the big annual men's championship. But from a women's perspective, the WXV is actually a better competition because it would pitch England against Canada and against New Zealand. And yet that doesn't get, largely because there have been issues with scheduling and it's in different far-flung parts of the world, but that is actually a better test for the Red Roses than the Six Nations is, but it doesn't get quite as much kudos or attention.
Yeah, so the original WXV, which was 3 tiers of 6 teams, you played 3 games all in the same country against the teams that were in your tier. England won, all of those games. It's changed now where teams are at liberty to organise their own games, which is viewed as the Red Roses being able to organise bumper clashes rather than face, maybe New Zealand, maybe Canada. So there'll be 6 games as part of that for the Red Roses. They'll be taking on Canada more than once, so that'll be really interesting to see. They'll be taking on the Black Ferns at home. So there will be some really good, exciting games later on this year. It also means that Scotland can go to Australia as well as part of that for more than just a one-test series. So that will be a really interesting test to see. Yeah, those Canada matchups again. I'm still pulling for the crosscodes clash between the Red Roses and the Gillaroos in Las Vegas, Australia Women's Rugby League and England Women's Rugby Union, but. I don't think it'll happen, but I'm still pulling for it.
Phone Eddie Hearn.
I'm still pulling. Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So France, Italy, England, Ireland, and Wales, Scotland. The matches in the Women's Six Nations, and Bath, Northampton, Glasgow, Toulon, Leinster, Sale, Bordeaux, Toulouse in the Champions Cup quarter-finals. Alex, hopefully going to be on the road this coming weekend.
Yeah, looking forward to. Well, after this, I'm going downstairs to the sports desk to. Explain to them just how important it is that I go to Bordeaux against Toulouse on Sunday.
Yeah, well, after hearing about the prawns from 11 a.m. and the car park outside the stadium, I don't blame you. Although, of course,
maybe I'll go on Saturday and stay the night.
Elgan, where you'll be at Allianz, Twickenham, I guess.
Yes, I'll be at Twickenham on Saturday for that opening Women's Six Nations game, and then following the Red Roses to up to Murrayfield, then Ashton Gate and Palmer and Bordeaux for the rest of the championship.
Good stuff. Lots coming up over the next few weeks on the pod. Thank you very much for listening. If you want to send us an email, the email address is theruck@thetimes.co.uk. You can also watch the show on YouTube. Head over to the Times Sport YouTube page where you can actually see us, which you may not want to do. You might want to stick to your pods. But thank you very much for listening. We'll be back with you next Monday.